And evolution is a change in allele frequencies over time. So if a mutation is beneficial, if it's neutral, if it's detrimental, if allele 1, for example, is good, bad, or indifferent, how do we know what's going to happen to that allele over time? Is it going to spread through the population, which is what happens when the allele starts at 50% frequency, so half of the alleles in the population start with allele 1. Over time, will it increase in frequency and become fixed? Up here, 100% of the alleles in the population are now allele 1. Or, on the other hand, will it go from 50% frequency to 0%? Will it be lost in the population? So it'll go from here down to 0. And how quickly will this happen? Does it happen in a small number of generations, like this plot shows? Will it happen over a large number of generations? How long does it take for evolution to happen? That's what today is all about, is trying to play with the parameters of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium to find out what normally happens to new mutations over time. Do they get fixed? Do they get maintained in the population? Or do they get lost? So that's today. So the goals for you is to play a bit with the parameters of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium to understand how allele frequency change is influenced by population size, the number of generations you look at, frequency, and so forth. And also to make predictions about how allele frequency might change over time. And most of this is going to happen today in small groups. You can do it individually if you want, but small group is more fun. So to understand drift, genetic drift, which is the core of today's concept, this is the essential piece of understanding. So why does genetic drift occur? What is genetic drift? Can somebody briefly summarize drift? What's the idea of drift? It's a change in allele frequency. So normally, from generation to generation in a population, allele frequencies will change. And this is drawn out here in this figure from your book. You start with a population of 10 individuals. They're all diploids. So you have 20 alleles, allele 1 or allele 2. The allele frequency of each is 50%. You've got half A1s, half A2s. So if you imagine every one of those diploid individuals produces a really large number of gametes in their lifetime, the gametes of those parents, I guarantee you, exactly reflect the allele frequencies in the individuals themselves. So if an individual is heterozygous, they're going to produce exactly 50% gametes that carry allele 1, and 50% of their gametes are going to carry allele 2. It's Mendelian genetics. So for example, this individual will produce an equal ratio of A1 and A2 gametes. A heterozygote will. Yeah. Technical difficulties. Please try again. So what happens when those gametes are used to fertilize and produce the next generation of offspring? Small number of gamete pairs. So not every gamete that's in this population of gametes from all of the individuals in the parental generation get used to make the next generation. So in this assumption, in this scenario, population size stays the same. So you start with 10 parents. Those 10 parents each make one offspring. So you get 10 individuals in the second generation. What happened to the allele frequency? On the left, the parents, it was 50-50, half allele 1, half allele 2. What happens in the offspring on the right side? What's the allele frequency now?
A1 increased.
So A1, there's more than 50% A1s. Why? Could be selection.
Population size.
So this could reflect the act of A1 being a beneficial allele. So you might expect it to increase in frequency. Or,
So that would be against the A2.
A2 could be selected against. So if A2 is detrimental, then you'd expect it to go down in frequency, which means A1 would increase relative to that. Or it could be population size, by which you mean what?
A smaller population size, not like an infinite population size. So the smaller the population size, the more likely drift is going to affect the allele frequency.
So a smaller population size causes a bigger change in allele frequencies. What happened here that causes the shift from 50% A1 to a larger number of A1s? At what point in this flow did that change occur? Where exactly did the allele frequency change from 50% A1 to more? Right, it's between the very large gamete pool and the small number of gamete pairs. What's that step? Fertilization. It was the random, I don't want to say choice, what's a better word? It's the random chance of which gametes carrying which alleles got used to fertilize or to be fertilized to produce the next generation. So by chance, even though half of the gametes carried allele 1 and half carried allele 2, in this example, by chance, more of the gametes carrying allele 1s were used in fertilization to produce the next generation. And the smaller the population size is, the more likely it is that you get these random changes in allele frequency. That's the essence of genetic drift. Questions about this? So the main take-home point is small population size means that you're more likely to have allele frequencies change over time. And saying it is one thing, but practicing it is something else, and that's what we're going to do next. And we're going to use an online web-based population genetics simulator that will run scenarios that help you visualize what happens when you change different parameters of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium assumptions. So what were they? So we assume if frequencies stay the same, remember Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium said allele frequencies will stay the same only if these 5 things are true. If the population size is infinite, if there is no mutation, if there's random mating, and random mating is one thing that the simulator we're going to use today doesn't control, but you can play in this simulator with population size, mutation rate.
Immigration.
No immigration or emigration. Something else that you can play with today if you choose. The other one that you can't today mess with, were there 6? Let's see. No selection. Just one more. Random mating. Ah, excellent. Number 3. Thank you. So today we're going to use a simulator that lets us alter the population size, mutation rate if you choose to, and immigration to see how changing those parameters affect allele frequency changes over time. And remember, the point of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium was if you can prove that 1 through 4 are true, that you have a very large population size, that there's no mutation, there's no immigration or emigration, and that individuals are randomly mating, then if you see allele frequencies changing in your population, you can conclude that there must be natural selection acting to promote the fixation or loss of one of the alleles, depending on whether or not it's a good allele or a bad allele. Yeah. So Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, quick review. If all 4 of those top assumptions are true, if you have a large population size, the population is randomly mating, there's no mutation, and there's no immigration or emigration, then natural selection is the only remaining explanation for why allele frequencies would change. So if in a population you look over time, generation to generation, you see allele frequencies are changing, going up or going down, if the top 4 assumptions are true, then the only other force that's left that could cause a change in allele frequency is selection. And the point of today is basically, at its most fundamental level, to prove that allele frequencies do change over time even when selection isn't acting. For that, we use a simulator. So what I'd like to do, just really briefly, 1 or 2 minutes, get into a small group. You can do this solo if you want to, but small group is maybe a little bit more effective. We're going to use these groups throughout the rest of class today, a few times. So come up with a prediction. If you have a population, you're going to watch over 2,000 generations here on the x-axis. If you start out with the allele frequency at 0.5, what's that allele frequency going to do over time? What's the trajectory it will take, assuming that this population's in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? So how will a 50% allele 1 frequency change over time through a population that's in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? So go into small groups, take a couple minutes, just make a drawing. You don't have to submit this anywhere. Make a drawing for your group. After 2,000 generations, what's the allele frequency going to be? I think the best we can do in the case where you start to see frequencies change, not appreciably, but a little bit, is that the population must not be perfectly in adherence with Hardy-Weinberg expectations. One of the expectations is being broken. So everybody can use your web browsers to go to this URL up here at the top. You don't have to do this right now. It will involve you more actively in just a minute. scit.us/redlynx, L-Y-N-X. And this is just an online simulator. It should work in your browser, but if it doesn't, that's why we're in small groups, because some browsers might not run this script perfectly. And it lets you, let's see, if I start the simulator, it lets you change a lot of different parameters about the population you're working with. So you can vary population size and see what happens to the allele that you're looking at. You can vary the initial frequency. So if you want to change the number of generations you look at, you can enter that or change that number here. You can change population size. Initial frequency is, what's the initial frequency of the allele you're interested in studying? So in this case, it was 50%. But you can change that. You could say, what happens to an allele if it starts at 1%? If 1% of the alleles in the population, the one you're studying, what will happen under all of these conditions over time? So for today, we're going to leave mutation rate at 0. So you could introduce mutations. Let's not. You can also change migration, but right now the migration rate, the default is set at 0. So let's say there's no mutation, no migration, and just play with generation time, population size, and frequency. So if I hit run simulation, it's going to start with a 50% allele frequency and shows me over time in a population of here 800 individuals. When you look over 2,000 generations, what happened to a mutation that started at 50% frequency in the population? What happened? It fixed. It went to 100% frequency in the population. Did anybody already do this with your tablets? Mm-hmm. So what happened?
I got fixed, but it got lost.
So we have, I got fixed, her mutation got lost.
I ran it 3 times. One was fixed, one was almost fixed, and then one was lost.
One was fixed, one was almost fixed, one was almost lost. So you can run this simulation multiple times. It gives you plots in different colors, and you can see, if you replay evolution, essentially, what happens with these parameters. You can get a big picture idea of, so what's the trend? What's normal? If you start with a population of this size with an allele frequency starting at 50%, what's the trend? What's the overall pattern? What might you most likely expect a population to do? So here we have an almost loss by 2,000 generations, a couple fixation events. So it's kind of hard to predict with these parameters, with this population size, this number of generations, what's going to happen to your favorite mutation. And remember, down here we've set selection strength is 0. That means these are neutral mutations. They're not good or bad. We're just watching random mutations that are in the population either go to fixation or be lost, or be maintained in the population. So this looks very much unlike the graph that some of you drew and I drew on the previous slide. What happens in a population that's in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So how would we have to change these parameters to make a graph that reflects that? You start at 50% and the mutation just stays perfectly at 50% or pretty close to 50%.
You need to get a lot bigger population.
Okay, so we'd have a lot larger population size. I don't know how big I can make the population size. 100,000, maybe. Hopefully that doesn't break the simulator. Starting at initial frequency of 50%, let's see if that works. So small population size, you get a lot of frequency variation. The graphs go up and down all over the place. Sometimes they go to fixation, sometimes loss. Increase the population size, that's the only change. What's happened?
Getting more.
Yeah, the fluctuations in the frequency from generation to generation decrease because the number of individuals in the population. You've got so many more gametes and so many more random fusions between sperm and egg in the computer that you don't see very much fluctuation from 50-50. The more individuals you look at, the less variation there is. Questions, concerns, comments? So big population size means we are approaching what we'd expect under Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. That allele frequencies wouldn't change. Okay, we're going to skip this. This is one exercise we already just did, an ad hoc exercise. So you don't need to post anything to Google Classroom. Because what I'd like to do now is for me to stop yapping and for you to play more with this simulator in your groups. So try this for size. So can you find a combination of parameters where you start at 95% frequency? This one should be easy, starting off easy. And maintain that in the population without being fixed. So it's almost at fixation. We've got 19 out of 20 alleles in the population are allele 1. Can you keep that 95% frequency maintained for 2,000 generations without being fixed or lost? So a couple minutes, work on that, again, individually or in small groups if you like. See what parameters you come up with to solve that problem. So here I played with I just used the defaults, I ran it 10 times, 9 out of 10 times I got fixation. Increasing my population size is what I'm hearing you say should fix the problem. So let's see. If I clear the graph, if I change population, what did you use?
Population, yeah, just 1 million.
1 million?
Just everything is the same.
I'll try 1,800,000. So let's try that. Ah, perfect. So it starts at 95%, huge population size, very little fluctuation in allele frequency. Doesn't fix, doesn't get lost. I could run this over and over again, and I'd probably get exactly the same line. So wouldn't it be nice to be in a population of 1 million individuals? Wait a second. Would it be beneficial or would it be detrimental? So I know I'm just picking random parameters here, but this has real-life application.
It might tend to be more beneficial because there's still more variety in a larger population.
So in a larger population, there's more genetic variation because in a real population, we have mutation, we have migration, we have selection.
But it also might be detrimental because everything becomes maintained and you actually lose variation because of that. Because you're not really able to mix with 1 million people. You know what I mean? So you could actually lose genetic variation because of it. Like it becomes maintained instead of either fixed or lost.
Right. So it's hard to take, in other words, it's hard to take a new mutation in a large population and have it actually go anywhere. So if you're in a population of individuals and you're faced with an environmental challenge and you need evolutionary novelty to help you out of your situation, if you're in a huge population, even a new, really beneficial mutation might take a really long time to spread through that huge population. Maybe you go extinct before that mutation actually helps you. Helps the whole species, that is. So one other one. Let's try this one. So back to the simulator. You start with a 50% allele frequency, but what can you do to make sure you guarantee me that that new mutation, allele 1, gets lost within 10 generations? So make sure you can run the simulation with the parameters you choose 10 times. And out of 10 times, every time, that mutation goes to 0%. So what sort of things can you do to make sure that your new mutation, allele 1, starts at 50%, gets lost?
I started with population of 10,
Okay.
generation 10, and my selection strength is a negative.
So you played with, now we've added in selection. So if you want to make sure a mutation gets lost, then what we're trying to suggest, one of the things is, yeah, it's a bad mutation. It's going to get lost from the population. So we could change the selection strength to -1, which is the minimum, I think. By the way, this is not selection coefficient, which is what we wound up calculating a couple of weeks ago. This is a different measure that ranges from -1, which means if you get this mutation, it's lethal. To the other end is +1. It's a beneficial. So -1 in this simulator means it's a detrimental mutation.
And then the population rate is 10, because it's lost within 10 generations.
Okay.
So generations is like 10.
So we can set that to 10.
And population is a 10 as well.
Okay. So 10 generations with a population size of 10, and if you get the mutation, it kills you. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, death, certain death, absolute death. Ooh, that was close.
It's still dying.
But it's still going down, right? So, which you would expect. Every individual that gets this new mutation has no offspring, basically. All right.
I found that the population size doesn't really affect it because even at 800, the frequency is lost.
So it's it's possible that population size is not the most important thing here. So we could add a few numbers there. Let's make it 10,000. See what happens. Oh, I should clear the graph. It's a much smoother line.
But still not at 0, 0%. Still touching the x-axis.
Yeah. So it's getting down to 0, or pretty close to 0 by 10 generations.
Is of both, yeah.
Yeah, there's an asymptote. Who knows if that's exactly 0% or not. There's one other thing there are lots of things you could play with. But again, the bottom line is Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium assumptions. So if allele frequency is changing, you can't ascribe it only to selection. Is there a way to do this without selection?
I did migration.
So migration or mutation rate, presumably, could cause complete loss of one mutation that starts out in the population over a short period of time. So it's not just selection that can do this. And I'd love it if some of you would try non-selection-based approaches to solving this problem. So here's some brief summaries, kind of what we've talked about so far today. That when you have a small population size, and we've seen this, so hopefully you've observed this on your simulators, when you have a small population size, the frequency change from generation to generation is really drastic. When you increase population size, the fluctuation in allele frequencies that are normal in finite populations are reduced. A key point, probably the most important point, is that even in the absence of selection, so when no natural selection is happening at all, in a real population, that is a non-infinite population, allele frequencies really do change over time. So you go study your fox population and you will see allele frequencies changing from season to season, generation to generation, even if there is no natural selection happening. So the change in allele frequency happens all the time. It's not always because of natural selection. It's because we're working with real...
Hardy-Weinberg is not working, right? Because the population size is not...
That's right. So this is not Hardy-Weinberg because that, in a real population, Hardy-Weinberg expectations aren't met. We do have mutation, we do have immigration, emigration, we do have finite population sizes. So this is a big population size, 1,000 individuals, but it's still not in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Allele frequencies are changing, even though this is a neutral mutation in this example that was in your textbook. They basically ran the same simulation. Said we define it to be a neutral mutation. It doesn't benefit or harm the individual that has it, but still allele frequencies change over time. So we just have to be careful, again, summary, we have to be careful not to assume that a change in allele frequency means that evolution is happening. This is not necessarily natural selection. Here's the kicker. And it's perhaps worth playing with Redlynx to prove this to you as well. I didn't make a point of pointing this out when I ran simulations earlier in the class. Every allele at some point in time will be fixed or lost. No allele is safe. So every mutation is destined to either spread through a population and be in every individual, or it's destined to die, to be eliminated, to go extinct. Mutations. It happens more quickly when you have a small population, like we just played with. So how do you make sure that a mutation is going to be fixed or lost in a population? You play with mutation rate, you can play with selection, you can play with dominance, which nobody mentioned yet. In a big population, guarantee you, every mutation gets fixed or lost. It just takes a lot longer. And as this says, this is probably the most important mathematical thing that I can tell you about this process today. I don't want you to remember them. That's why I didn't show you the equation that this simulation runs on. It's kind of ugly. The probability of fixation at any point of a mutation is equal to its allele frequency. It's brilliant. It's easy. It's simple. If your allele 1's at 95% frequency, that is if 19 out of 20 mutations in the population are allele 1, then it's got a 95% chance of going to fixation. If 1 in 100 mutations or alleles in the population is allele 1, it's got a 1% chance of going to fixation, 99% chance that it's going to be lost. And that's probably why, well, that is why, every time you see, for example, in this plot here in the bottom left, every time allele frequencies start to increase, they rapidly go to fixation, because the more alleles in the population are allele 1, the more likely it is that it goes all the way to 100%. Right? Starting at 50%, what's the probability, which every one of these simulations starts at, what's the probability that it goes to fixation? 50. So out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it looks like this ran 9 or 10 times on the left. 4 went to fixation, 5 got lost, so about 50-50. Half the time this allele fixed, half the time it was lost. If you run this simulation longer, you'd expect the same thing. If you initiate at 50% 10 times, eventually, over who knows how many generations, half of those allele 1s would get fixed, half of the simulations it would be lost. And there's a relationship in population genetics that basically says that you expect fixation or loss after 4 times the population size. So if we wanted to see, and try this on your simulators, not now, but if you're interested, 4 times n, or n is the population size, is where you expect to have observed fixation or loss. So if we, so right now we've got a population size of 1,000, which what this means is if you look at 4,000 generations out, that's when you start expecting to see whether or not your mutation gets fixed or lost. So here we've looked at 100 generations. So we need to look 40 times longer than this graph shows before we would expect to start seeing this mutation to go up or down. Sorry, 4,000 generations, not 40,000. Yeah, we need to look 40 times longer than 100 generations before we'd expect fixation or loss. So try setting up those parameters in Redlynx and seeing if that actually happens or not. I want to make sure I save a little bit of time for some housekeeping. Normally I don't do announcements. I'm going to leave this Socrative quiz open for quite a while, until 11. So plug something in there to show me you were here and paying attention. What does all of this have to do with evolution? So that's going to be the question on the exit quiz. But before you work on that, I have some good news and some bad news. Depends on your perspective. I'm not going to be here for a while. So this week, I'm leaving tomorrow morning to go to a conference. So I've got some Google Classroom activities to set up for you for Wednesday and Friday. Some of them will involve Redlynx. Then next week, I start jury duty. And I have no idea whether or not I'll be here, because that, of course, depends on whether or not I'm selected, et cetera, et cetera. So there will be some alternative things for you to do next week if I happen to be downtown. Those would be video lectures to watch. And your term paper introductions, the first few pages, basically, are due next Friday, drafts. Okay, no points assigned. Then, after that, we might be on strike, in which case there would be other things for you to do. So basically the point is watch Blackboard. I'll post announcements on what to do every day in case I'm not here. This week I will not be here, Wednesday, Friday. Next week and beyond, it's up in the air. You don't have to come to class.
All of April.
Basically, yeah. Basically,
Just throw it in there.
yeah. I don't know. Do I try my hardest not to be on jury duty? I suppose. I'll just have to say I've got a PhD in genetics and see if it's a forensics case, I'm sure they'll, yeah, no, we don't want you.
Tell them you're a felon.
I could just commit a felony right now. Okay.
It's not that bad.
It's not that bad. And the last thing, I just want to remind everybody, I've got spots in my lab for master's students. If you're still trying to figure out what to do next year, if you're interested in research, master's degree program applications are still open at Fresno. And I have part-time research assistantships available for master's students, and there are also teaching assistantships for financial support from the department. So if anybody's interested, please talk to me. And again, watch Blackboard for announcements about